Hello, and thank you for coming to Caspian and Vantage BP's webinar. My name is Matthew Boardman. I am the Content Marketing Manager here at Caspian, and I'm just going to do a quick intro, set some expectations, and do housekeeping, and then I will pass it over to our experts to talk about counterfeit and unauthorized sellers. First things first, a recording of this webinar will be sent to the email address with which you registered. We will also have a live Q&A at the end of the webinar today. So please, if you have questions at any time, ask them in the chat, and we'll drop some reminders for you as we go. If you do have interest or any follow-up questions, then you can reach out to Caspian or Vantage after this webinar. So with that, I will pass it over to Derek to please introduce himself.
Great, thank you, Matthew, and Caspian, thank you for having me here today. My name is Derek Manlepeg. I'm one of the co-founders here at Vantage, and we are an online brand protection company, and we're really excited to speak more at this presentation today.
And I'm Jessica, I'm with Caspian. I'm a key account manager. I joined Caspian in right around 2016. And so I've been an account manager for them on the retail side with Thirdparty as well as our agency side.
And hi, everybody. This is Richard Taylor. I am an agency manager at Caspian. I've been with the company for about 3.5 years. And during that time, I've helped oversee our Perispect and Ad Manager software platforms. So to get us started, I just want to share a little bit about Caspian, and then I'll hand it over to Derek to share a little bit about Vantage BP. So what is Caspian? We're a tech-enabled marketplace growth platform. We were founded in 2008, and during that time of our growth, we were focused mainly on being a third-party seller on Amazon and other marketplaces. And since then, in the last few years, we've evolved to become a retail agency, a retail seller, an agency, and a software provider for companies who are looking for some help on marketplace. We provide software and services across major e-commerce marketplaces like Amazon, Walmart, and Target Plus. And generally speaking, our mission is to optimize and grow brands on today's leading online marketplaces.
Great. Yeah, and our company is called Banjop. We were founded in 2018, bringing us a little over 4 years, and we are basically a brand protection company that automates the process of identifying, monitoring, and enforcing unauthorized resellers across a little over 168 global e-commerce marketplaces. So that's a lot. You know, we cover all national versions of Amazon, eBay, Walmart. We even cover our marketplaces in China, Alibaba, DHgate, Tmall, you name it. We cover pretty much every marketplace around the world, and right now we're a little over 3 million successful infringement removals for some of the world's largest brands. And we've been really excited to work with Caspian. You guys have been awesome partners. I think our partnership has been a little over 1.5 years now, and it's been working really, really awesome.
Great. Awesome. So then why you might be here today. So this is great for brands who sell online, who have brick and mortar relationships, and whether you're trying to clean up your channel or just kind of figuring out your strategy or being proactive. So maybe you do have a clean channel right now and you just want to continue to increase your knowledge to make sure that you can keep that clean and know who all of your sellers are. So we're going to go through a couple of topics. One is going to be the impact of unauthorized sellers. So we're all going to share our experiences with brands and different things that might impact why a brand might be looking to kind of clean up their sellers and why that might impact their sales. We're also going to chat about how to remove unauthorized sellers, some different tips and tricks. That's where Vantage BP is going to come in quite a bit and share their experience with how to do this. You're going to see a case study and then finally some takeaways. And there will be a live Q&A at the end, so you'll be able to put any follow-up questions in the chat.
Yeah, so let's first start with types of unauthorized sellers. Kind of go into that first, and then kind of dive a little bit more into how to solve and tackle them. So really, there's 3 kind of categories of unauthorized sellers. You know, the first category are your counterfeiters and intellectual property thieves. These are basically manufacturers that are not supposed to be producing your product. They generally produce it typically in China, listed on marketplaces like Alibaba, DHgate, Tmall, Taobao. And what tends to happen is they sell it in wholesale, and then you have 3P sellers that are typically in the United States or in domestic markets that buy it at wholesale and relist it on Amazon and marketplaces like that. We also see a ton of things with intellectual property thieves, people that are not supposed to be using your IP to sell products online. We see a lot of misinformation with eBay. Sellers think that they can use your images off your website to sell your own products. Big no-no, that is a copyright infringement, can't do that. So there's a lot of discrepancies with intellectual property that a lot of our brands are having issues with in a lot of these marketplaces. Second from that, we see a lot of issues in the gray market with arbitrage buyers. And what are arbitrage buyers? These are basically buyers that are going to retail shops and they're finding discounts. They're buying things at a volume, typically because the products are about to expire or they're about to get moved off the shelf. And what they're doing is they're buying it in bulk, and again, they're relisting it on marketplaces like Amazon, eBay, Walmart, and it sits there. And typically, especially with our natural food brands, we see all the time consumers buy stuff from Amazon and the product's expired by the time it gets to them. And that's the reason why, is because these arbitrage buyers, they're constantly trying to make that upsell by trying to find those low market opportunities. You also have a massive issue with drop shippers recently. There's these tools, one of them is called obirlo.com, that basically enable people to pick Alibaba and AliExpress listings, and they basically can funnel those onto marketplaces where that if the consumer purchases the product, the manufacturer will actually ship the product directly to the consumer. And that's a really, really interesting thing that's happening right now, because you have a lot of these sellers that don't actually have inventory. They basically can create a shop, they can create some marketing opportunities, run some ads on Instagram, run some ads on Facebook, and they don't actually have any inventory, but if they make a sale, it goes right through, straight from the manufacturer, typically straight to that consumer. And then the last category that I think a lot of brands on this call are especially having issues with is their own authorized resellers. Authorized sellers that maybe are coming from a distributor that they have, or maybe it's a direct account that they have. And typically the relationship is that, hey seller, you're supposed to be selling this product in your retail shop. You're not supposed to be selling this product on Amazon or eBay or anything like that. And what tends to happen is these authorized sellers agree to that. They say, okay, no problem. But they buy this product, and again, they create a new store on Amazon, a different name, and they backdoor it. And typically when they backdoor that product, they're not listing it at MAP prices. They're listing it way below, obviously above wholesale, but below MSRP, and that ruins it for everybody else, right? So really a big issue right now is finding out who these sellers are, where they're getting that product from, and trying to cut that off. So the next topic of category here is, what is the gray market versus what is the black market, right? So gray market is basically genuine goods being sourced and sold through unauthorized channels not approved by the brand, right? So again, you have these authorized sellers or even arbitrage buyers that are not approved by the brand that are buying this product and selling it on marketplaces where they shouldn't be. But it is legitimate goods. It just shouldn't be sold in that way because the brand doesn't want it to happen that way, right? And then obviously black market, this is everything to do with counterfeit goods. So these are products not approved by the brand. They've never got authorization to produce the products at all, and basically they are counterfeits, and they are violating intellectual property rights of the brand owner.
So there's a lot of different things that can be harmful about unauthorized sellers. There's three that we're gonna touch on here, but the first one is brand consistency across platforms. So this has been a big one that I've noticed recently with my brands is, well, I guess not even recently, but this is a big point in brands, is that with so many different marketplaces, so with brick and mortars and Amazon and Walmart and Target and all these different opportunities for customers to find your product, brands want that experience to be consistent across the marketplace. And that can be with pricing, or even just with your content, your photos that are being shown, your your descriptions that are being put up there. When you have so many different sellers, or specifically sellers that you're not sure who they are and you can't control them, sometimes that brand messaging gets different. Target is, priced one thing and they have different images than maybe eBay does, or Amazon, or your brick and mortars have a different pricing than what your online sellers have to adhere to. So one of the things that is can be harmful about unauthorized sellers is just that different story. A customer doesn't have a consistent brand experience across all of the platforms. And one of the things that we noted here is brand registry. So brand registry on Amazon specifically was created in order to give brands more control over their branding. So they would have control to give a specific seller a title that allows them to update content on Amazon. Well, one of the things through the years that we have learned is that if too many sellers were given that brand registry title, or if you have two different sellers that are marked as registered agents or brand owners, or if you have too many people with the same titles within a brand registry, even across international, so Canada compared to the US, or if you have a different authorized seller that has brand registry in DE, that can impact other sellers' ability to upload. So for example, if Caspian has your brand registry in the US, but somebody else has your brand registry in Canada, sometimes that can impact Amazon accepting content. So brand registry is a great tool to kind of help control what your customers are seeing specifically on the Amazon marketplace. But there are some things that get a little tricky when it comes to too many sellers, or sellers that you're not familiar who they are. Then coordinating growth efforts. Do you know who's selling your products? When, especially again on Amazon, with that buy box, it's more of a pie that's sliced out versus each individual seller has their own listing. And so you have to coordinate those efforts of who is going to be your brand registered person, who's in charge of your content, who's in charge of your sponsored product. Sponsored product only runs when that seller is in the actual buy box. So if you're funding marketing and you have 5 sellers in one listing, theoretically, if only one seller is running sponsored products, it's only running 1/5 of the time. And so if you're trying to coordinate those efforts of marketing and whatever else, it's really important to know who your sellers are and know who you're working with, so that you have those partnerships and everybody is working together to grow that brand. And then the third one is jeopardizing your existing seller relationship. So we hear all the time, as primarily being an e-commerce and Amazon seller, we hear all of the times with our brands, we want to make sure that our brands are continuing to have positive relationships with their brick and mortars. And it can be a real detriment to your ability to get into brick and mortars if that online channel isn't controlled. So if you do have, you go to the brick and mortar and it's priced 2 times higher than what Amazon is, that can be a real detriment to your relationships with those people. And so making sure that you know who those relationships are. The last piece that we did call out here is if you already have exclusive relationships with sellers. So if you work with a seller exclusively on Amazon, you have an agreement with them that they get to have the buy box 100%, therefore they're going to run all this marketing or whatever it may be. If you do have unauthorized sellers that pop in and take those sales from the exclusive seller, that can put some strain on that relationship as well. So that's a quick overview. Richard, Derek, do either of you have anything else on this slide?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with brand consistency, you were right on the point, Jessica. I think a lot of times brands have issues with this, especially when unauthorized sellers create their own listings. I think we see that time and time again, where brands come to us and say, hey, look, like we've made these 100 ASINs, but these 10 ASINs we never created. And they're basically ASINs of products we already have on Amazon's marketplace. What do we do about it? And I think a lot of times just brands don't realize that they actually have tools and ways to file, takedowns against these things, because they are marketplace policy violations. Second from being able to file IP infringement stuff, you can actually file seller policy, violations based on sellers that are putting in fake model numbers or putting in fake titles or changing the brand to basically try to get away from that ASIN so they don't have to sell with everybody else. These are issues that brands have all the time, and there's definitely ways to clean that stuff up.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, so next, Derek is actually going to take this one. He's going to chat a little bit about his experience on some removing unauthorized sellers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there's 2 prongs of this, right? And I think the topic of what we're speaking about right now is, Amazon's stance on how involved do they want to get and how involved do they not want to get, right? And I think when it comes to black market, counterfeit goods, intellectual property infringements, I do say that Amazon has built a pretty decent platform in comparison to some of the other marketplaces, where as long as you do register intellectual property, you are signed up for brand registry, you do have rights to file intellectual property infringement actions against listings that are violating IP. But I think what tends to happen though is a lot of times brands and even other agencies will leverage these tools to file takedowns against things they shouldn't do, right? And I think there's not a lot of education on how to use these tools, which I think is important. And I think what tends to happen too is when sellers or brands or even agencies, leverage these tools to file takedowns against on things that they shouldn't be removing, Amazon will pull those restrictions and basically kick them off the platform, right? Which makes sense because there is angles and you can't file everything in one place. So with counterfeit IP and stuff, they do have a pretty good stance on it, but when it comes to gray market, they typically do not help. I mean, that's one of the things that Amazon has been very strong about is when it comes to unauthorized resellers, they typically stay out because they say, hey, look, this is between the brand, this is between the seller, this is not between us, right? We're here creating a transaction platform that facilitates transactions. We're not doing anything illegal, right? So why do we need to get involved? Okay, so that's their stance. However, there is things you can do, and I think what we spoke about a little earlier, Jessica, was about, with the unauthorized ASINs. I mean, there's all sorts of different types of marketplace policy violations that you can get on sellers, right? We see all the time, again, where sellers are shipping products that are not materially sound. They're expired, they're used, they're broken. The packaging's messed up. The SKU isn't even the right SKU. It's actually a different country's SKU, and they've somehow parallel imported the product to try to make an upsell. But again, that product shouldn't be sold through that ASIN. So if we see those types of things, those are marketplace policy violations you can get ahead of and file takedowns on. So look, I mean, again, Amazon with gray market, they typically do not help, but there is angles that you can use the platform to do it. It just don't do it through brand registry. There's other ways you can submit that kind of stuff. And that's one of the things that we help brands with, is kind of educating them on the tools that Amazon has and how to use those tools effectively.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll jump in and talk a little bit more in depth about what brands can and can't do. This is mostly going to be specific to sellers that are in your listings and in regards to kind of genuine products. Derek is going to be our biggest expert when it comes to the counterfeit and gray and black market topics. But in regards to the things that you can do as a brand, number one is make a plan. You're going to want to think through all the different scenarios that you have in regards to how your products make their way through channels and get to places like Amazon and other marketplaces. So considering who you limit distributors that where they are selling to or who they're selling to, and then also taking into consideration who are your authorized sellers. You don't really necessarily have the ability to put up a wall or have a defense in regards to unauthorized sellers, but you do have the ability to have great communication with the sellers that you do authorize and share your plan and share what your expectations are with them. Setting explicit pricing policies is another really important step, whether it's a MAP or minimum advertised price or an MSRP pricing policy. And then get it in writing. So contracts and agreements are key. A lot of times brands want to have the best intention with the companies that they work with and the sellers that they work with, but if it's not in writing, at some point in time, it's going to get broken and that relationship is going to get strained. And then of course, sticking to your plan, doing your best to across the board have consistency with the expectations that you've set. So that way, everybody who's playing in that space with you understands what they're allowed and not allowed to do. Moving on to monitoring your presence. We always recommend, depending on what your SKU count is and what your bandwidth is having some sort of plan and process and workflow so that you can regularly monitor your listings. There is software like Paraspect that's available for making it easier, but some brands have, few SKUs or maybe one or two listings, and they may not necessarily need a software tool like Paraspect and others that are out there. We just recommend that having a plan in place and a workflow that says, okay, at least once a week or maybe a few times a week or maybe daily, depending on the activity that's going on in your listings, that you're monitoring those. And then knowing who your sellers are, both authorized and unauthorized. There are lots of different options out there in regards to getting some help around determining or identifying sellers. Part of that is found within Caspian software Paraspect, but even just keeping really good records of your customer and sales database, having great conversations with your sales teams, and just having a good understanding of who are these sellers and doing your due diligence to try to identify them. And then you can also leverage strategic partners. So what we would recommend in that case is maybe you have really great relationships with your brick and mortars or your distributors, and talking more with them about who these sellers are. Another tactic that we find to be really helpful is maybe you have a really strong relationship with a third-party seller that's authorized, and they are doing some diligence in regards to identifying and knowing other sellers in those listings. You can easily talk with them to see, hey, do you know who so-and-so seller is? And then also another a tactic or a consideration would be how you track your inventory. So sometimes lot numbers or serial numbers can be taken into consideration for how do we track where this specific inventory went. So that way that there's what I would call like a trail of breadcrumbs to figure out where did that inventory or that specific serial number come from. And then we've also seen brands even go as far as doing some stickering or making some sort of identifiable packaging to make it a little bit easier to understand. A good example of the packaging example is maybe you have a online version or a brick and mortar version of packaging for the same product. That would make it really, really easy to identify that XYZ product that was purchased on Amazon through a test buy, as an example, would be coming from a brick and mortar channel versus one of your e-commerce channels. So I'll have you go to the next slide, Jess. And then continuing on, so establishing workflows for contacting sellers. So this is key when you have sellers that you need to reach out to communicate with. Some of these sellers you're going to know whether you have an existing relationship with or not. Other ones you're probably not going to know, and you're going to need a little bit more help. So what we've done is compiled a list of different things that you might consider doing, just in case it wasn't on your radar as ways to communicate with sellers. So obviously one of the most quickest, easiest, simple ways is emailing a seller. If you have their email address, or if you've researched that seller and found a potential email address that would work, we definitely recommend that, because that's going to oftentimes be the easiest and simplest means of communication. Sometimes sellers operate websites, and if their website has a contact us form or some sort of embedded email link, that's another way of kind of starting that conversation through a digital means of communication. I also go into sellers' Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and try to use that social media angle. Sometimes you can find a seller on Facebook. A really good example would be, let's say that there's a unauthorized seller on Amazon who operates a thrift store or some sort of liquidation retail business. Most of the time, companies like that are going to have some sort of social media. And if you can make that connection and have a really good feeling about, like, okay, this seller is probably this based on the information that I found, reach out to them through Facebook Messenger. The only harm that that's going to cause is you spending a few minutes formulating that email and trying to communicate. Also on Amazon.com, every single seller storefront is going to have that ask a question button. We know that this is not necessarily the best way to communicate based on experience that probably everybody has tried before, but it is one of those scenarios where what I would call it's no stone is left unturned. So even if you're not having good luck with some of the other means of communicating with sellers, I would still recommend building into your workflow a messaging or a message that goes out using that ask a question button, just to make sure you've kind of checked that box. Sometimes you can source phone numbers. If you have a phone number, somebody in your organization, whether it's an e-commerce team member, a salesperson, or maybe even somebody from your general counsel or legal team reaching out by phone. And then we can always also leverage a letter, a certified mail through USPS if you have a physical address and some of those other forms of communications don't exist. Happy to talk more about those if you have questions during the Q&A, so feel free to kind of queue those up. And then we'll touch briefly on just consequences. What are some consequences that sellers may have? And this is really speaking to the relationships that you have with companies that are an authorized seller, or maybe it's a seller that isn't authorized to sell on Amazon or Marketplace, but they're a brick and mortar. Some of those consequences could be things like pausing PO fulfillment for that company, or maybe even terminating relationship. My one thing that I would say in regards to these consequences is sometimes they can be stern, but they also are potentially cutting off some business that you have. So you'll have to weigh that out internally to determine, is this something that is worth me doing because I know that I'm going to lose certain business because of it? And once you kind of come to that, decision or conclusion, you'll be able to say, okay, this is something that I'm willing to do or not do.
And real fast before we leave this screen, I think it's a nice part to kind of insert with this can and can't do is you have a lot of options. I think it's also really important to take the time to learn what you can and can't do. And Derek's going to actually touch on this a little bit later as far as he kind of touched on like that IPR complaint, and that has become kind of a go-to of sometimes they're not actual legitimate IPR complaints, but it's, oh, well, Amazon's going to kick them off, and just kind of the line that you toe there. So I do think it's super important. There's also times where things will come, be sent to us and the contracts, our team looks at them, and MAP is a great example. MAP, like legally, we can sign MAP agreements or acknowledgements. We can't sign agreements because there's just that a couple of free trade stuff that gets a little tricky. So just making sure that you are taking your time to like do diligence to look through of, okay, if this is really what I'm going to hone in and do, what legally can I do? And one of the things that Richard kept going back to, which is super important, is just that communication piece. I know we love having strong relationships with our partners and just that open-ended of, hey, this is our strategy, or this is the way that we're turning, or this is really what our goal is. And the more communicative that you can be with your sellers in your network, whether that be third-party sellers, agency relationships, or your brick and mortars, of just getting everybody on the same page of this is our strategy, this is where we want to go, who can help us, who's on board. If you're not on board, then we maybe need to find another solution. But I do think there's a lot of things that your partners can do to help you out, and it all benefits us. It helps brick and mortars when you can get your e-commerce pricing under control. It helps Caspian when we have less and less unauthorized sellers in the listing. So we have skin in the game, and most of the time a good partner will want to help you out with that. So anyways, I did want to just really quickly put that in there of just making sure that you're taking time to look at what you actually can do, and you're not just assuming what you can do, and that you leverage those communications. Anything from you, Derek, real fast before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing for me is I definitely agree with both your points. And Richard, a little earlier, I think really Google is your best friend. I mean, if you have a couple sellers that are problematic, I mean, Google them. I mean, you never know where you're going to find. I mean, typically we do see social media platforms that they're on. Maybe we see them on different marketplaces that actually have information that is being shown on that marketplace, right? So, I mean, look, if you have a seller that's on Amazon, don't fret, look them up, see if there's other brands talking about them. Typically they do, and see what's out there. You might be able to find that information. When you're messaging sellers on Amazon, it does get tricky. Yeah, you have that ask a question button. It doesn't always work. Amazon does have an algorithm where if they sense that you're sending a message through their platform that's not a typical buyer seller message, they'll block it, right? But that's the first thing to try, because sometimes it may go through. So give it a shot. But a second to that, I would say definitely leverage Google and see what you can find.
Great, good. And then Derek, I think you're taking this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So when to see outside help. So I guess, with the one-offs, again, you could probably self-manage that. But once it gets point in time where you have, 20 unauthorized resellers, 40 unauthorized resellers, we have brands that come to us with thousands of unauthorized resellers. At that point, you need to find an automated solution to help tackle it, right? But really, before you leverage the solution, you really need to make sure you have a strong legal foundation in place. And Richard, I think this was an earlier point that you made as well, is contracts and agreements. What agreements do you have with your distribution partners, with your reseller partners? And do those agreements specifically state that these people are not supposed to be selling on Amazon or these other marketplaces? And typically, when brands come to us, we ask them like, hey, do you have a manufacturer's warranty policy in place? Hey, do you have a MAP policy in place? Do you have these things in place? And brands are like, no, we don't, right? So look, I think to make the most effective use of a technology service or an agency or a brand protection solution, you really need to have a strong legal foundation. And there's a lot of really good legal partners out there. We actually work with one that's really, really strong. They're based in Ohio. They're called KJK, KJK.com, really big law firm, and they helped numerous of our brands basically put together the reseller agreements, distribution agreements, anti-diversion clauses, and this really helps build a foundation that we can then leverage when it comes time for enforcement. So look, before you come to us, I'd say definitely go to them. Once you have your foundation in place, then the next step is, okay, let's implement a solution to help automate this, because obviously, you guys, being the brand, you need to sell, you need to be working on your business. You shouldn't be worrying about, the price points on Amazon and trying to tackle and get around and enforce this stuff yourself. You really shouldn't. And there's solutions that you can automate this stuff for a fraction of the cost it would actually cost to put in a person to just do it by themselves, right? So look, I mean, we have a solution that can scan these marketplaces every day, looking for unauthorized resellers. And when we find an unauthorized reseller, we have a method to be able to send them a notice, whether it's through the platform or through email, again, in an automated way. And typically just by sending those notices out, we see a 70 to 80% drop off in sellers. They say, oh, look, they're finally caught me. They're coming at me. Maybe I should go to a different marketplace to sell, whatever it is. So we see a pretty big reduction of sellers right out the gates just from a notice. But then past that, if the sellers don't respond or they don't comply, then again, you want to leverage an agency that knows what you can do. What are your IP rights? Do you have trademarks in place? Do you have copyrights in place? What angles can we enforce things on? And these are things that our solution will look at and basically help evaluate, and then we'll take action against things in the right way, right? And I think that's, again, to an earlier point, a lot of times brands leverage these IPR tools saying, oh, this is counterfeit, when it's not. And when they do that, I mean, yeah, you might get your Amazon restricted, but second to that, you might also get sued, right? I mean, a lot of brands and even agencies are getting sued for filing takedowns against things they shouldn't be doing. So again, before you leverage these tools, you need to have your education in place and you need to know what you're really doing, with them. And yeah, I mean, I guess the last point here is, if your unauthorized reseller problem is growing faster than you can manage, again, implement a solution. There's automated tools out there. There's map tracking solutions. There's unauthorized reseller enforcement solutions like us. But again, it really comes down to having a foundation in place and then leveraging a technology partner to help scale it.
Great. All righty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have an awesome case study here. This is actually with one of our biggest partners, Bionic. They're one of the leading footwear brands owned by Caleres, which I think owns about 13 of the world's biggest footwear brands. And yeah, with this company, we started with them about 4.5–5 months ago, and within 3 months, we were able to have a reduction of 70% of their unauthorized reseller problem. They came to us with over 16,000 unverified product listings and over 590 resellers. And within 3 months, we were able to get rid of 373 of those resellers and over 5,000 listings removed. And again, this was a combination of counterfeit. This is a combination of gray market. And what's really cool about our solution is it can tackle both. And really, it starts with notifying the sellers, seeing what information they can provide to us. And typically, when we send out these notices, some sellers will respond and they'll say, hey, we're buying these products from this distributor, are we fine? Hey, we're buying these products from this supplier, are we fine? Here's our invoice. And when we get these invoices in, sometimes these invoices don't add up. And we're like, hey, look, you're buying this from a distributor that's not our distributor. And it basically is clearly counterfeit. And sometimes these 3P sellers, they don't know. They expect that the product they're buying is legitimate and authorized. So they're the first ones to come forward and say, oh, no, I have good stuff. But then we have to say, no, look, you bought it from a counterfeit distributor. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to keep that stuff off. So look, education is important. And if you are a 3P reseller and you are buying from an unverified distributor, you really need to make sure with the brand that, hey, is this a legitimate source? Otherwise, you might be buying it from somebody that's illegitimate. But yeah, within 3 months, we were able to tackle about 70%. I think right now we're close to 80. And again, it was a really big problem. They didn't really know how to tackle it. And we implemented a solution, and literally as fast as 4 months, we were able to get most of it down. So again, I think automation is your biggest friend here.
Great. So a couple takeaways. Sorry, I think I cut someone off. Richard, did you want to go?
No, I didn't have anything.
Oh, okay. So a couple of takeaways. Clearly, there can be a lot of investment in this. If you have, whether it's monetary or time, even just starting with maybe there's 2 resellers that you don't know and you decide that you want to start with the stickering method, even just those types of things, obviously it takes a lot of investment. So to Richard's point earlier, as far as making a plan, it's really important to make sure that, like, is this strategy right for you? What is the best method for us? Are we okay with having 5 sellers? Do we really want to try to hone down to 1 seller? So just recognizing that it does take an investment to clean up your channel. It can be a long process. So making sure that it is right for you. And then obviously the proactive approach is always better. So if you do have a clean channel right now, don't take it for granted. We see a lot where all of a sudden out of the blue, you know, sellers start to come in if people start to get a little lax in monitoring their channel. So it's great if you're starting with a clean channel. It's still great to have a plan in place. It's great to have a method for if there was ever a situation to happen where people started popping in. How do you make sure that you're going to keep that channel clean? So I believe at this point, yes, we're going to give it back. I believe Katie is going to pop on, either Katie or Matthew, to do the Q&A.
Yes, Katie is still occupied, so I'll be moderating our Q&A, and we've had some really good questions come in. I'm very excited to go through some of these.
Good.
We'll start with one of the, what I hope is one of the easier questions. How do you get rid of sellers that lower the price when you have a MAP pricing policy? And Richard, I thought you might be a good one to take this.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question, and it's probably going to be one of your bigger headaches that you have on a regular basis if you find yourself in this situation. One is going to be monitoring those listings. You can do that by visually inspecting the listings on a regular basis, or employing the use of a tool like Perispec to help speed up that process and automate it. Second is going to be just trying to identify who that seller is. And Derek had a great call out a little bit earlier, is just using Google. One thing that I can speak to in regards to the seller identification efforts that we provide through Perispec is that's where me and my team spend a good amount of time trying to investigate who the sellers are. So we'll Google the seller name, we'll try to get some additional information. One thing that I can point out is Amazon started providing some additional information on the seller storefront back in September, which has been a tremendous help. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to always be accurate information, but it's a good starting point because you typically will have either an additional name to research or a seller location to kind of attach to your search criteria when you look for that seller. So if seller A is called, let's just say Online Pricing USA, and they are based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, if you do some Google searching for those, you might come up with something, and that might create, again, what I call a breadcrumb that's going to hopefully lead you back to that seller within your database. Easier said than done a lot of times. So if you do need some additional help or want some additional kind of more pointed direction, then I would definitely encourage you to reach out to Caspian to connect with the Perispec team or Derek's team over at Vantage BP.
I also think, just to jump in real fast, if you do know who that seller is and they continually price below MAP, I think that is the piece, as we mentioned earlier, like you do have to have some kind of enforcement in place. If the seller continues to drop MAP and there's no consequences that happen, it's not really, like, why wouldn't the seller just continue to price lower? So I think back to, if you do know who the person is, figuring out like, okay, how far are we willing to go on this? Do we know, are we going to cut them off? Are we going to do the 1, 2, 3 strikes? You know, are we going to cut them off the whole time, or maybe for a 3-month trial? So I think that is the piece where if you do know who the seller is, you've been in contact with them, you've already had these conversations, and it's kind of gotten to the point where it's like, okay, they're not adhering to my policy. Where are we going to take this further in that enforcement?
Great advice. Lots of questions coming in now. So, excuse me. So I'll move directly to another. Derek, one that I thought you could answer. How can you stop arbitrage sellers?
Well, really tricky. I mean, that kind of similar to this MAP enforcement thing is, look, you got to be able to find out where they're sourcing your product from. I mean, time and time again, we see sellers that are buying stuff, again, going to a Costco retailer, and they're seeing stuff that's about to be expired. They're buying it at a discount. How do you stop those guys, right? When they actually are buying legitimate stuff, they're buying it from a retailer, they are protected by something called first sale doctrine, which basically means if you buy a legitimate good, you can technically sell it wherever you want to. Is it illegal, right? But what it comes down to is when they start selling it on Amazon, is it materially the same? And that's, in most times it isn't, and it can be expired, it can be defective, the packaging can be used. It doesn't have a manufacturer, it's not protected by a manufacturer's warranty. I think that's another thing that we make sure that brands, when they come to us, have in place is, do you guys have a warranty that you will void if they buy it through Amazon through an unauthorized reseller, right? That you won't support. And that can help make a materially different claim that the product is different, right? It's not supported by the same warranty. So in that case, it does violate to a certain degree. So look, arbitrage it's tricky, but I think it really comes down to, putting pressure on the sellers to identify the goods, to make sure they are genuine and authentic. And by putting that pressure on them, when they do finally, support with a receipt or an invoice, then you look at that and you say, okay, now I see it's coming from this distributor, it's coming from this supplier. We have to have a conversation with them that, look, they're not supposed to be selling to the seller. And if they continue to do it, we're gonna have to be ready to terminate that relationship. And it can be tough for brands to do that. Especially if some of these distributors or suppliers are pretty big for them. But look, I mean, really the only way to tackle this issue is by having good communication, having good agreements in place, and then be willing to terminate agreements if it really comes down to it.
Great. Another one that we have, product leaks out from distributors. Do they have a backdoor program to sell to smaller sellers?
We've seen that. So I wouldn't say every distributor does it, but we've definitely seen it. We've even seen distributors that are backdooring it onto Amazon under vendor management, right? And they're selling it through Amazon.com. And in those situations, it gets tricky. And I'll bring up KJK again, one of our really awesome legal partners. We've actually leveraged them to file DMCA subpoenas against Amazon to find out who's providing products to Amazon as a seller. And that's an effective way. Typically when Amazon.com is selling, you don't really know who's supplying those products if it's not you. And there is means to be able to file legal actions to be able to find out who it is. And in doing so, we actually found several distributors that were moving the product, and they said, "Oh, sorry, you caught us. We're not going to do it anymore." So look, I mean, there's angles, whether it's through legal means or whether it's through leveraging us, but it does get tricky, definitely.
Great.
Another piece is tracking back the inventory. I know that this seems like such a, I don't know, again, it's a time thing, but especially if you have a smaller distribution network, of putting some kind of identifying of, if you have distributor A and you have distributor B, having some kind of identifying mark on either the UPC or something along those lines for distributor A versus distributor B, and being able to buy a product from Amazon.com, and then you can track it back to, okay, well, we know that it's going to, coming from this distributor. So that's another thing we've seen brands do, is they'll do that tracking through either lot numbers or whatever, and being able to prove to that distributor, like, hey, no, like this is actually coming from you.
That's a great point.
I think that segues very naturally into another question we received, Jess, is what is your take on the transparency program?
Ooh, I'm not super familiar with the transparency program. So if somebody else is, you're welcome to take it on.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I'd say that we have about 140 brands that work with us right now. I think there is only one that actually uses transparency. So just point blank, I mean, transparency, it's a program that Amazon has released that basically says, like, look, if a product, use our SKUs and our barcodes on all of your products, whether they come through Amazon or not. And if a product comes through Amazon's channel without having that barcode, we will send it back. And it sounds good, right? It sounds like, oh, maybe this is the gray market solution I've been looking for. But the reality is it's not, because you actually have to use that barcode on all of your products, whether they're coming through Amazon or whether they're just going through your normal supply chain. And that's, I think, an issue that a lot of brands have with this. They're like, okay, how much data are we really giving Amazon here? We're giving them data on how much products we're producing, where these products are going, the price point these products should be sold at. I mean, this is a lot of data, and obviously Amazon is a data grabbing company. So I think a lot of brands, our brands in particular, are very hesitant to leverage this network because it sounds good. And maybe it is the counterfeit solution, but again, what is Amazon going to use all this data for? We really don't know at this point in time, but we have seen Amazon replicate brands' products. They do it. They make white label products, and they've been doing it. And are they leveraging this data to do it? We don't know yet. But I think, again, our brands are hesitant. We want to see more information about it. I think more information is coming soon, and we'll just continue to wait and hear about it.
Yeah, and I can jump in there real quick here. The other piece to transparency program is there is going to be a cost associated with it. So that's going to impact your margin, and it's essentially going to be more money going to Amazon. So that's another piece to kind of weigh out if you're considering the transparency program.
And it's much more targeted towards counterfeit versus like managing your sellers. So I think that one too, if your issue really is counterfeit, making sure that only legitimate product is being sold on Amazon, it's a lot more targeted towards that versus identifying sellers, as far as what I understand about it.
Great. Many questions still coming in. If we aren't able to answer all the questions during this Q&A, we will write them up and our answers to them, and we can distribute that afterwards. So please keep sending the questions in if they come up. Moving on, we have one. If a listing has 5 sellers and the images and bullets were changed by one of them, how can you identify which seller made the changes?
You would, you can technically, it should be, if you're brand registered, it should be only the person who is brand registered. It's possible that you could talk with, if you have a relationship with a specific seller, it's possible you could chat. Let's say that you don't know all 5 of the sellers. You could talk to one of your specific sellers, and we could create a case with Amazon to see if they would give us some information about who's attributing that information. But there's no way for you to like proactively go in and see whose information is popping up. Amazon only is the one who owns that. So there would need to be some kind of a case or communication with Amazon to have them share whose account that is attributing from.
Richard, I know that there is some means to review pricing changes and the pricing history by sellers. Is there any avenues available similar to that for content changes?
No, not that I'm aware of, Matthew. I think it's the same thing that Jess just talked about, is trying to use Amazon's case management system to see if we can get answers. But that's only going to be if a seller is connected through Seller Central.
I see. We now have a marketing question here. The question is, we have several authorized resellers and are sharing the pie with them. Our 2 main products each have 100+ child ASINs, resulting in a complex buy box situation. We are doing 90% of the Amazon advertising right now. Should we require the resellers to also run Amazon advertising in order to not have as much time where no ads are running?
Yeah, you know, it depends on what you're actually running. So sponsored brands specifically, they run regardless, and then the sale is given to whoever is currently in the buy box. So if your seller account is running the sponsored brands all of the time, but let's say Caspian is one of your sellers, but Caspian is in the buy box when a seller actually clicks into your sponsored brands, Caspian gets that sale. So that is what's hard when you have multiple sellers and only one person is funding like things like sponsored brands, sponsored videos, that kind of thing. Sponsored products specifically run when a seller is in the buy box. I would say when I first started working at Caspian, the buy box was pretty evenly split. So if you had, 5 sellers, and they would be split one fifth of the time. If you have 2 sellers, then it would be half and half. I'm seeing more and more that even in listings where we have maybe 8 other sellers that we sell alongside with, Amazon's algorithms are sometimes giving certain sellers favor over other ones. They're not evenly splitting it. And so if you happen to have a relationship, if you are running those products and you're getting 80% of the buy box, then that's a good chunk of the time. But anytime you are splitting that buy box, if both sellers aren't running sponsored products, there's going to be a time frame where you specifically don't have sponsored products. So that is separate from the other AMS options.
Great answer. Thank you for that, Jess. One that I think, Derek, you might be able to take this one on. How would you approach it differently if another seller is not using your brand name, but simply violating your IP and selling your item, e.g. a pure IP violation without being a brand violation?
So in a sense, they're selling the brand's product, but they're not leveraging the brand's name in the product listing? Is it?
I think so. That's how I'm understanding this question. And if I'm misinterpreting this, please just post another question chat and correct me.
Yeah, well, that could be, so an answer to the situation that we've seen where that happens is kind of going back to an earlier point we were both making was unauthorized ASINs, right? We see time and time again, sellers that don't want to sell on an ASIN that has 20 sellers on it. So what they'll do to go around Amazon system is they'll take the brand name out of the listing title, they'll take the brand name out of the actual attached brand on that product listing, they'll change the model number, they'll change the SKU, even the UPC, and then they'll somehow get around Amazon system to create a new listing and hope that it sells, right? And in those situations, when an unauthorized, ASIN comes up like that, either you can file a seller policy violation to get that removed, and that's not on the basis of IP, that's actually on the basis of the seller doing something they shouldn't be. That's a violation of Amazon's policies, and typically those come down pretty quick. So that is an angle. And I think that is more geared towards an authorized ASIN. I don't believe that would be an IP infringement thing. If we were talking about other marketplaces like eBay or Walmart, where it's typically one seller, one listing, if the seller is using again images from the brand's website to sell those product listings on those marketplaces, they can't do that. That's a copyright infringement. They have to take their own photos of those products unless they have approval from the brand to be able to leverage those images. So again, in that situation, you would be able to file an IP infringement complaint. But when it comes to Amazon's marketplace, where you have a whole bunch of sellers, authorized and unauthorized on one listing, obviously you don't want to file a copyright infringement complaint against your own listing because that would ruin it for everybody in listing, approved or not. So it does get tricky based on which marketplace you're doing this on. But I think with Amazon in particular, if you are seeing unauthorized ASINs, again, that is a policy violation that you can file against.
Great, thank you for that, Derek.
Yeah. And we also
next one.
Yeah. Oh, and one more point to that, Matthew, as well is, so there is solutions, right? And I think Periscope might do this. I know we do this, where if you can give us a list of your authorized ASINs you did create, we'll continually scan the marketplace every day looking for new ASINs that you did not create. And in those situations, we'll evaluate it, right? That same day typically, and we'll look and see, hey, is this an ASIN that is approved or is it not? And if it's not, then we'll push it through, right, for enforcement. So again, it's typically hard to find those things, but when you leverage an automated solution, it definitely makes it a lot easier.
Excellent. Next, we have an authorized third-party seller continuing to battle us on the buy box. We have tried to discuss with them and they're not backing down. We are also having quality issues with them as they are shrink wrapping our product, which overheats and impacts the quality. Any suggestions?
Sounds like a materially different complaint. I mean, if you guys ran a test order purchase and you got it and the product comes in and there's a problem with it, that definitely is enough evidence for us to be able to file something against it. So look, I'd say the first bet is running that test order purchase, getting the order ID, going into Amazon system, filing a takedown on that on the basis of it being materially different because of whatever reasons you just provided. The product is not materially sound. It's it's melting. It's defective. Whatever it is. And typically Amazon reacts pretty fast to those things. Sometimes within as fast as 2 or 3 business days, they'll pull that seller down. So look, build a case. I think it starts with the test purchase and then file that takedown.
Great. Next, how do you ensure an action or response is taken through brand registry?
Also tricky. So they don't always respond to everything you submit, right? And sometimes you have to resubmit things. Amazon deals with a massive volume of requests, obviously every day. So look, I mean, file the first takedown, see what happens. If they don't respond, it could also mean that what you are filing is something you shouldn't be filing. And that kind of goes to an earlier point. Do not leverage the IPR tool to file IP infringements against things that are not IP infringements, right? Yes, they are unauthorized resellers. Yes, you do not want them on the marketplace, but you cannot file trademark and counterfeit stuff against them if it is not a trademark and counterfeit infringement. And really, you need a lot of education here. And we're happy to speak to that a little bit more. Caspian, I'm sure, is as well. But look, if you use these tools in the wrong ways, Amazon will give you a chance, typically by not responding. But if you file it again and it does go through and the seller complains, you might lose your account, right? You might lose your selling privileges, you might lose your brand registry account. So really, you got to take caution here. And typically, you want to leverage either a law firm or us or Caspian that knows how to navigate these tools correctly so that you're doing it the right way.
We now have one about warranties. They say, we've gone down the warranty route and our warranty is non-transferable. Amazon told us we expect manufacturers to honor their warranties, so it's clear they don't agree it's materially different, even though there is court rulings that say it is. Have you seen Amazon responding differently than what we've seen?
That's a great question. So I'd say probably about a year and a half, they were accepting those complaints. You'd be able to file a manufacturer's warranty complaint on the basis of, hey, look, the policy is right here on our website. There's a difference, take it down. And about a year and a half ago, Amazon was accepting those. About a year ago, they stopped doing that. They caught wind that that was kind of the new angle that enforcement companies were leveraging to be able to get stuff removed. So they don't do that anymore. However, there is certain things that you can word to be able to get stuff down on that basis. It's a little tricky. And there's also legal law firms. Again, KGK is, again, one of our best partners. They're really good at being able to make this claim. And they do have success doing it. So look, it comes down to how well you're able to explain it. What is that material difference, right? It's not just about taking in the product, but there might be some set terms like 30 days, 60 days, you're able to do this or whatever. And it really is building a big enough case that the marketplaces agree. But typically, as of right now, Amazon does not take in manufacturer warranty complaints. You really have to build a bigger case than that in order for it to succeed.
Richard, I think this one would be good for you. How can I get only one seller to sell on Amazon?
So yeah, that's a good question. The ultimate way is just selling yourself, meaning getting an action plan together where you are the only seller, and then limiting sales to anyone else that might be considering retailing that product on Amazon, basically telling everybody else no. If that's not an option, then you're going to find a trusted retail partner like Caspian, who has a great track record in the marketplace space, and work exclusively with them, create exclusive agreements, and then also communicate that to every single seller, customer account, anything that you have in regards to the same products. So being very direct and transparent about who the seller is, and that your expectation of them buying your product to put in brick and mortar or on a direct website or something like that excludes them from selling on a place like Amazon or another e-commerce marketplace. Again, probably easier said than done. And again, Amazon isn't going to limit who a seller is, so you're still going to need to stay on top of it and pay attention to your listings. But that's going to be one of the best ways to do that. Jess, if you have any other thoughts there, I'd love to have you interject as well.
Yeah, I think this is really the piece where it's like it does take investment to do this, especially if you have a large network off of Amazon. So if you work with a couple distributors, if you have lots of different brick and mortar relationships, it is going to take a decent amount of investment if you're cleaning up a channel. Now, this is also the part where, like, if you're proactively thinking, okay, either our channel is clean now, or we're getting ready to launch on Amazon or something along those lines, it's great to just like set the bar from the get-go of like, this seller is the only authorized seller on Amazon. But it does take that plan, it takes investment, and it really takes enforcement. And just being consistent on, like, from the get-go, here's the policy, and if it's new, letting everybody know, here's the policy. Either, again, the contracts, agreements, signed acknowledgement that you have received this policy, that you are not allowed to list on XYZ marketplace. And then it really does come down to the brand or a partner. So this is one thing I don't think we've explicitly mentioned that I do think is important. So Caspian specifically, because we are a reseller, we cannot actually enforce exclusives, or even with Perispect, we can provide the information and the resources. Our team can't physically go out and enforce it, just because that's a conflict of interest, because we sell on the actual marketplace. So if you don't want to do it, get a partner like Vantage BP, where they're going to do it on your behalf, but really figuring out, okay, this is our policy and we are going to enforce that and we're going to stick to it. Sometimes there can be loss of business at the front end because you are cutting off POs or whatever you end up doing with the enforcement. I work with quite a few brands that do have exclusives with us, and it does work out really well in the long term. And I think it comes back to that consistent brand. You're only worrying about one person for content. Most of the time when sellers have an exclusive, they're more likely to throw skin in the game because they have 100% of the buy box. So what are they offering to be an exclusive? It's just, overall, it's less monitoring of the channel once you can get that enforcement place. But it really does come down to like how hard are you going to enforce your new policy?
All right. Well, we are a minute over time, so I'm going to have to call us off here. There's a handful of questions that we weren't able to get to. I would like to just extend a tremendous thanks to each of our presenters for giving us your time and expertise today, and also to our audience for sticking with us throughout all of this. We will send a recording of this webinar to the email with which you registered later this afternoon, and then we will also work to answer those questions for you that we weren't able to address here. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.